excited to see him. That how you are really tough, right? Just look at me. Yes. What do you want? You want to try to fight?
In a hidden corridor of Golden Harvest Studios, two legends met in silence, and what followed became one of legend in the world of martial arts cinema.
Before he just came from American for the visiting on the set, then people introduce him, oh, this is a Bruce Lee, this is Sammo, blah, blah. He already is my idol.
In a quiet, almost forgotten corner of Golden Harvest Studios, a story emerged that would forever alter the world of martial arts cinema. It was here, during the tail end of a day's shooting in 1971, that two living legends, Bruce Lee and Sammo Hung, crossed paths in a brief, seemingly casual exchange that would be etched into history. Little did anyone know that what started as an impromptu demonstration would soon become a legendary moment in martial arts folklore. Before this meeting, Lee had just flown in from America, visiting the set while people around him introduced him as a legend. But for Sammo Hung, it was much more personal. At that moment, Bruce Lee wasn't just a name in the papers. He was a man who had shaped his very idea of what martial arts could be. And as the two squared off in a narrow hallway, neither of them could have anticipated the intensity and depth that this encounter would come to represent in martial arts history. This wasn't a choreographed fight, nor was it a grand performance for an audience. It was a raw test of skill, speed, and philosophy. What transpired in those few moments was more than just physicality. It was a quiet clash of ideologies, each man measuring the other not in terms of who was better, but in terms of a shared respect for craft. As Sammo Hung later recalled, their exchange wasn't meant to be a fight, but something else entirely. Yet, in the stillness that followed their brief encounter, a sense of profound respect and awe took root. Bruce Lee's legendary speed and precision became evident not just to Hung, but to everyone who witnessed it. The echoes of that moment would reverberate through both men's careers, but would also change how martial arts films would be seen forever. But was it truly a fight, or was it an invitation? An offering, rather than a challenge? In this reimagined retelling of their now famous hallway confrontation, we'll uncover the layers beneath the story, the real lesson behind the legend, and explore how this quiet exchange became a defining moment in martial arts history. The Hallway Challenge. The narrow corridor of Golden Harvest Studios in Hong Kong carried a kind of quiet that didn't belong to film sets. Normally, this hallway echoed with the shuffling of crew boots, the clatter of lighting equipment, and the distant shouting of directors coordinating scenes. But on this particular evening in 1971, the world seemed to hold its breath. Fluorescent lights hummed steadily above, casting a pale glow over the polished floor, giving everything a strangely suspended atmosphere, as if time itself had slowed, waiting for something extraordinary to unfold. Filming had wrapped for the day. Technicians drifted out one by one, chatting idly, unaware that history was about to take shape in the most unexpected corner of a studio. Two men stayed behind, as if pulled together by gravity. One was Bruce Lee, the sharp-eyed, coiled energy phenomenon whose presence demanded attention even when he stood completely still. The other was Sammo Hung, broad-shouldered, youthful, and full of raw talent honed through years of punishing Peking opera school discipline. Though only 19, Hung carried himself with the confidence of someone who knew his body was a weapon. Earlier that day, Bruce had arrived from the United States. People swarmed him in excitement. Actors, assistants, stunt performers. Introductions were exchanged in rushed breaths. Bruce Lee, they said with pride, as though merely speaking his name carried power. This is Sammo, up-and-coming stunt star, very talented. Sammo listened silently, but inside, a boyish all bloomed. Bruce wasn't just a celebrity to him. He was his idol, the one whose philosophy he admired, whose movies he absorbed like scripture, whose reputation grew larger every time whispers of his speed reached the Hong Kong stunt community. Now, by sheer coincidence, or perhaps something deeper, the two stood facing each other in an empty hallway. No cameras, no crew, just stillness. Sammo felt the weight of the moment settle onto his shoulders. He hadn't come to boast, to challenge, or to prove anything. He simply wanted to test the stories, to see, with his own eyes, whether Bruce Lee was truly as fast as everyone claimed. The request hadn't been bold or aggressive. It was almost shy. Something like, "I want to see your speed just a little." Bruce turned toward him, a faint, almost playful smile forming at the corner of his lips. He had this uncanny ability to make even silence feel electric. So he murmured, tilting his head just slightly, "You want to know if I'm really that fast?" Sammo nodded once, firm, respectful. No bravado, just truth. Bruce shifted subtly. His posture changed, though Sammo couldn't pinpoint how. Nothing dramatic happened. No flourish, no dramatic stance, no theatrical gesture. Yet the air tightened, muscles readjusted, eyes sharpened. A coil wound itself silently within Bruce's frame, invisible yet unmistakable. It was like standing in front of the storm, moments before the first lightning flash splits the sky. Bruce's voice was calm, steady, yet charged with inner voltage. "Do you want some?" The words carried no aggression, no challenge. They were an invitation to understanding, to insight, to a glimpse behind the legend. Before Sammo could even answer, before the idea of reacting could form, something blurred. Bruce's foot shot forward, like a streak of light. It was impossibly fast, so fast that Sammo's brain could only register motion after it was already over. No wind-up, no telegraphing, no wasted gesture. Just pure speed compressed into a single perfect line. The kick stopped inches from Sammo's face, still as stone, yet vibrating with the energy of the velocity it had carried. Sammo felt the wind of it graze his cheek. Gasps echoed from the few crew members still lingering at the far end of the corridor. They hadn't meant to witness anything. They had simply been walking by. But now, frozen in place, they stared in disbelief at what looked less like a kick and more like something supernatural, an expression of speed so refined it almost defied the limits of human movement. For a moment, nobody breathed. Bruce lowered his foot, relaxing into stillness as if nothing significant had happened. "How was it?" he asked softly. Sammo exhaled. He hadn't realized he'd been holding his breath. A grin formed, not out of embarrassment, but out of genuine admiration. "Very fast," he replied simply. The words were small, but they carried weight. A confession, but also a salute. The encounter lasted barely seconds, yet its impact would ripple through their careers for decades. For Bruce, it was a demonstration, not of dominance, but of principle. Jeet Kune Do was built on intercepting, reacting before thought, dissolving hesitation. That kick, that blur of motion wasn't just technique, it was philosophy in physical form. For Sammo, it was a revelation. Not because he'd been defeated, there had been no fight, but because he had witnessed mastery, raw, unfiltered, undeniable. Crew members whispered about the moment in awed tones long after the two men walked away. Many would later embellish the story. Some swore Bruce's foot was too fast to see. Others swore Sammo had stumbled backward. Others described it as a real fight. But those who truly understood that moment knew better. It wasn't combat. It was insight. And in that hallway, with only buzzing lights as witness, two legends measured not strength, but spirit. Meeting not as rivals, but as martial artists seeking truth in motion. More than a test. News traveled strangely within the walls of Golden Harvest Studios. Secrets never stayed secret for long. A whisper from a stuntman would drift to a cameraman, who would pass it to a makeup artist, who would casually mention it during lunch. And so, within hours of the hallway encounter between Bruce Lee and Sammo Hung, the story had already spread like a silent wildfire. People described it differently, but the core never changed. Bruce Lee had moved with a speed that not even trained eyes could fully track. By the next morning, technicians were discussing it while coiling cables, stuntmen reenacted it between takes, and even some of the higher-ups, those rarely impressed by anything that didn't involve budgets or schedules, paused to acknowledge what had happened. Though only a handful had witnessed it directly, the retelling carried the weight of truth. Bruce Lee's reputation for impossible speed had always been legendary, but now there was a fresh story to reinforce it. One grounded not in rumor, but in a first-hand moment that left those present breathless. Bruce Lee at 30 was something beyond extraordinary. His physique had been forged through relentless routine. Early morning runs through steep Hong Kong hills, hours spent striking heavy bags until his shins bruised, afternoons filled with sparring that forced every reflex to sharpen. Even in downtime, he never rested. He would shadow box, experiment, analyze. Jeet Kune Do wasn't simply a martial art for him. It was an evolving philosophy built on efficiency, adaptability, and constant motion. Meanwhile, Sammo Hung, at 19, embodied a completely different lineage of discipline. His childhood in the Peking Opera School had been grueling to a degree most couldn't imagine. 12 years of acrobatics, stances that burned the legs, stick beatings to correct mistakes, and endless routines that fused artistry with combat theater. Peking opera training was a crucible that shaped boys into warriors and performers alike. Hung had learned balance the way others learned language, pain the way others learned arithmetic. But that contrast, the American influence philosopher with lightning reflexes facing the rooted, traditional performer, was exactly what made their hallway encounters so magnetic. They represented two worlds tied together by the same passion. Sammo later insisted again and again, it wasn't a fight, just a demonstration. Light contact. He emphasized those words because he understood how legends twisted over time. But to the people who watched, the atmosphere had been charged with something far heavier. There was no aggression between them, no desire to win, but there was tension, the kind that emerges when two forces of equal intensity quietly test the boundaries of their own capabilities. Those who had stood nearby described it vividly. Bruce Lee's stance was effortless, almost loose, yet somehow unbreakably stable. His breathing slowed, his gaze sharpened, and a stillness overtook him that felt eerily similar to the moment before a hawk dives on its prey. Sammo, for all his size and youth, matched the seriousness of the moment. Not because he wanted to surpass Bruce, but because he respected him deeply. Then came the kick. No one could agree exactly what they saw, because no one truly saw it. One stuntman swore Bruce's leg vanished and reappeared in the air. Another claimed he saw only the afterimage. A third insisted he didn't see the kick at all, but only heard a sharp slice of air and then saw Sammo's hair tremble. What they all agreed on was the silence right after. Not the silence of fear, the silence of awe. Bruce stepped back, gave that small half-smile he was known for, and relaxed as though he had done something entirely ordinary. Sammo lowered his arms and nodded, not in defeat, not in surrender, but in acknowledgement. He had just witnessed something at the razor's edge of human capability. Later, Sammo would call the moment even, not because he believed he matched Bruce's speed, but because he understood martial arts culture. In the world they inhabited, calling an encounter even was an act of humility, a way of preserving respect between two practitioners without diminishing either. Bruce didn't need victory. Sammo didn't need validation. What mattered was the understanding that passed between them. Unspoken, but undeniable. Bruce's question, "Do you want some?" would later be interpreted in countless ways. Some thought it was playful arrogance. Others thought it was a challenge. But Sammo understood the real meaning behind it. In Jeet Kune Do, there were lessons that could not be explained through words or lectures. There were insights that had to be felt. That question wasn't an invitation to fight. It was an invitation to experience truth. And that kick, stopping inches from Sammo's face, was that truth. It wasn't raw aggression or showmanship. It was a message. This is what it means to move without hesitation. This is what it means to live purely in the moment of action. For the witnesses, though, that message translated into something far simpler. Bruce Lee was faster than any human had the right to be, but they misunderstood something. The moment wasn't about speed alone. It was about presence, a philosophy so deep that Bruce often compared it to Zen, acting without acting, moving before thinking, expressing truth through the body. Sammo understood that, and that was why, years later, when fans pressed him, "Did Bruce defeat you?" he only repeated, "It was even." It wasn't denial. It was respect. And more than that, humility. Because in that short exchange, both Bruce and Sammo walked away with something neither had entered the hallway seeking. A deeper recognition of one another, not as film stars, but as martial artists carved from different experiences, united by authenticity. The world would later treat this encounter as a fight, but the truth lived somewhere else. Not in the clash. in the connection, the painting of speed. Stories in Hong Kong's film industry rarely stayed contained. If something remarkable happened, even behind closed doors, it somehow drifted through the city like smoke through narrow streets. And so, within a matter of days, the tale of Bruce Lee's silent, lightning-fast exchange with Sammo Hung began circulating with a kind of energy only myth-making moments possess. No newspaper reported it, no photograph existed, and not a single frame of footage captured it. Yet practically everyone working in Hong Kong cinema heard about it. To outsiders, it was merely another rumor in a world constantly shaped by exaggerated tales of daring stunts and legendary martial artists. But to those who truly understood movement, choreographers, stunt performers, and the small circle of practitioners who dedicated their lives to martial precision, the story felt different. It carried the weight of something authentic. The whispers were always the same. Bruce Lee hadn't just demonstrated speed. He had revealed something deeper, something people struggle to describe. By 1971, Bruce Lee was already becoming more than a film star. He was shaping a philosophy that blended martial arts with personal expression. Jeet Kune Do was not a style, but a way of stripping away the unnecessary. Efficiency, directness, adaptability. The principles were simple, yet the execution demanded complete mastery of mind and body. Bruce studied biomechanics, psychology, and philosophy with the same intensity he applied to training. His goal wasn't to be better than others. It was to reach the fullest version of himself. Sitting across from that concept stood Sammo Hung, a young artist formed to the fire tradition. The Peking Opera School wasn't simply a place of learning. It was a crucible where children were molded through harsh discipline. They learned acrobatics until their joints ached, stances until their legs trembled, and emotional control necessary to express entire stories through movement. Sammo's technique wasn't about speed. It was about form, elegance, rhythm, and the seamless fusion of combat and performance. When those two worlds met in that narrow corridor, something extraordinary happened. People began describing Bruce's movement as if it were art, not combat. One director compared it to watching calligraphy drawn in air. A stuntman claimed Bruce's kick had a rhythm to it, an unpredictable beat that disrupted expectation, as if he had painted a stroke no one had ever seen before. That metaphor stuck. Bruce Lee painted with speed. Traditional martial arts often relied on structure, forms practiced thousands of times, choreographed sequences refined through repetition. But Bruce rejected rigidity. He spoke frequently of water, formless yet capable of filling any container, unstoppable when flowing freely. That philosophy translated into every strike he threw. There was no pattern, no prearranged flow, only pure response, guided by instinct sharpened through relentless training. Sammo, in that brief instant when Bruce's foot passed inches from his face, felt the depth of that philosophy. He didn't just see speed. He saw intention, clarity, freedom. Not the freedom of chaos, but the freedom of mastery, where movement wasn't forced, but emerged naturally, like a brush guided across a canvas by an artist who no longer had to think about technique. In that one moment, Sammo glimpsed the essence of Jeet Kune Do, movement without hesitation. To understand the impact of that realization, one must understand what Sammo represented. His artistry came from precision and repetition. His strength came from discipline, engraved into his muscle memory since childhood. But what Bruce showed him wasn't something that could be memorized. It wasn't tradition. It wasn't even technique. It was expression. That was what set Bruce Lee apart. Not his strength, not even his speed, but the way he blended philosophy and physicality into something entirely new. The irony, of course, was that the hallway encounter was never meant to be seen. Yet its spirit resurfaced 2 years later, when Bruce personally asked Sammo to appear in the opening fight of Enter the Dragon. Sammo was not credited, not prominently featured, and didn't appear again in the film. But his presence was intentional. Bruce chose him for that role because he respected him, not just as a performer, but as a fellow martial artist. When filming began, those watching noticed something uncanny. Bruce's movements in that opening sequence contained echoes of the hallway moment. The same fluid rhythm, the same effortless blending of techniques, the same sense that he was painting each motion with invisible ink only a few truly understood. One take, 2 takes. That was all Bruce wanted. That's real enough, he said. He didn't mean real as an unscripted, but real as an honest. His goal wasn't to show dominance or superiority. It was to showcase truth. Many fans later interpreted the scene as a reenactment of their private encounter, a stylized tribute. Sammo himself never confirmed this, but when asked, he always smiled softly, almost knowingly. Sammo frequently explained that what Bruce did that day wasn't an attack. It was a lesson, a way of showing a new horizon for martial arts cinema. He understood what Bruce wanted the world to see, that martial arts, when freed from rigid patterns, could become more than self-defense or performance. They could become a language capable of expressing emotion, philosophy, and humanity. A fight scene could tell the truth. And Bruce, with every motion, painted a truth that would reshape the entire genre. The generation that followed, Jackie Chan, Yuen Biao, and many others, absorbed that lesson almost unconsciously. Their choreography blended humor, innovation, and fluidity in ways never seen before. And if one looked closely, somewhere beneath their movements, beneath the acrobatics and rhythm, there lingered a faint echo of that famous kick. The one Sammo Hung felt but never quite saw. Bruce Lee didn't just influence martial arts. He changed the way movement could tell a story. And Sammo, standing in that hallway, witnessed the first stroke of a masterpiece the world wasn't yet ready to understand. Filming the fight that wasn't real. By 1973, Golden Harvest Studios had become the epicenter of a cinematic revolution. The energy inside was different. Charged, expectant, unaware that history was about to be cemented in front of the cameras. As the crew prepared for the opening sequence of Enter the Dragon, there was a palpable tension in the air. Not the kind brought on by stress or production issues, but the kind that emerges when something meaningful, something deeper than film, is about to unfold. Bright studio lights blazed overhead, illuminating a polished floor that reflected every movement like the surface of a shallow pool. Camera operators checked their rigs. Assistants whispered directions. The director watched quietly, sensing that this scene, this very moment, was more than just another fight choreographed for a movie. It held a weight beyond what audiences would ever know. Bruce Lee stepped barefoot onto the mat. He wasn't just walking into a scene. He was stepping into a memory. Across from him stood Sammo Hung, the same young performer who had once faced him in that quiet hallway 2 years earlier. Sammo was older now, more confident, shaping himself into one of Hong Kong's most promising talents. But when he looked at Bruce, he saw the same aura, the same controlled intensity that had struck him silent back then. Bruce had personally chosen Sammo for this scene. Not because Sammo was famous. He wasn't, not yet. Not because he demanded it. He never asked. But because Bruce respected him. Because something had passed between them in that forgotten corridor. Something that didn't need to be spoken to be understood. When filming began, the set transformed. What audiences would later see as a cleanly executed sparring match carried deeper layers beneath it. Gloves on, sweat catching the light. Both men circled one another with the grace of seasoned predators. But the choreography was deceptively simple. It wasn't about flashiness. It wasn't about spectacle. Bruce wanted authenticity, a raw expression of technique, rhythm, and philosophy. And so they began. Bruce moved first, as he always did. His attacks were crisp, sharp, perfectly timed. Even the camera struggled to capture his speed. High-speed film reels barely kept up. Every movement carried precision born from thousands upon thousands of hours of disciplined practice. Punches snapped like cracks of thunder. Kicks whistled through the air with clean arcs of energy. Footwork flowed like water over stone. Yet Sammo held his ground. He wasn't merely reacting. He was meeting Bruce with a rhythm he knew best. Structure, balance, and a controlled artistry of a performer who understood combat as narrative. To the crew, it felt like a duel between philosophies. At one point, Bruce executed a judo-style sweep followed by an armbar, moves that would be considered groundbreaking decades later in the world of mixed martial arts. In the 1970s, they were unheard of. Bruce wasn't just mixing styles. He was demonstrating a future that hadn't arrived yet. Sammo tapped out on cue, but the moment didn't end with the camera. It lingered in the air, the same way their hallway encounter had lingered in memory. Something unspoken passed between them, a quiet acknowledgement that what they had just filmed wasn't merely choreography. It was a reenactment of a myth that most people didn't even know existed. Bruce walked off the mat with his usual confidence, wiping sweat from his brow. A crew member asked if they should do another take. Bruce shook his head. "It's real enough," he said. To the untrained ear, that sentence sounded casual. But to those who understood Bruce's philosophy, it was profound. What he meant was that authenticity cannot be recreated once it's been expressed. And that brief moment between him and Sammo held authenticity that no repetition could match. After filming wrapped, Sammo remained seated on the mat for a few seconds longer than expected. His breathing slowed. His hands rested on his knees. Bruce Lee's legacy continues to inspire, not just in martial arts, but in life itself. His philosophy of speed, adaptability, and self-mastery transcends a fight and speaks to the essence of personal growth. If you found this story as inspiring as we did, don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's keep this conversation alive and continue to honor the legend of Bruce Lee together. Until next time, keep evolving.